Hello everyone, welcome back. I hope your day is starting off just fantastic. This picture here was posted by Natalie in the I Choose Canada group. It is a beautiful shot looking across the Ottawa River towards Quebec, about 45 minutes west of Ottawa, she says. Just an amazing shot. Our country is so beautiful. I can't get over all the amazing pictures that you're all sharing in the I Choose Canada group. I'll leave the link for that group in the video description. Today I'm going to discuss a little bit of a kerfuffle, I would describe it. Recently in the news, reported here on CBC on November 19th, Mark Carney and Danielle Smith moved closer to a deal that could include a BC oil pipeline, says a source. Prime Minister Mark Carney and Alberta Premier Danielle Smith are moving closer to reaching a deal on the future of Alberta's energy sector. Well, that's inflammatory rhetoric. It's not going to make or break Alberta's energy sector. But according to a senior government official, it's likely to include some language about the path forward for a Northwest BC oil pipeline that Smith has long demanded. While the last Liberal government essentially slammed the door shut on an oil pipeline to the region, Carney is open to considering such a project if Alberta, as the proponent, conducts the necessary Indigenous consultation and negotiates with the BC government, among other conditions, the official said. The federal government is considering granting limited exemptions, and there's a possibility it could use the power under Bill C5, the recent Nation Buildings Project law. It's officially called the One Canadian Economy Act, to allow tankers associated with this proposed pipeline to bypass the moratorium. But in response to these talks, BC Premier David Eby blasts the secret talks on proposed North Coast pipeline. And he characterizes the discussions as secret because the federal government is speaking directly with the Alberta government. And the discussions are not to just simply approve a project. Now, there is a legitimate concern here about allowing tanker traffic to the northwest coast of British Columbia. There is an environmental concern. And the biggest stakeholders are the residents of British Columbia and the Indigenous people that live in the area. So obviously they're going to have to be consulted. And it may be that the correct decision is to continue the tanker ban. If the risks are too high for an environmental disaster, that would be the correct decision. But is there a way of adding rules and regulations that will mitigate those risks enough to allow it? I guess that's the decision that has to be made. And I'm sure that there are many of you who are watching the video that could have some very passionate opinions on what you think is the correct answer. Leave your comments in the comment section and let us know. We'll see from how the comments shape up, how many people, just without a detailed knowledge of it, are for or against allowing tankers to dock in the BC Northwest Coast. Leave your comments in the comment section. But let's continue here and let me give you some information about pipelines in general. Here's a map of the major infrastructure in North America, major Canadian and US crude oil pipelines and refineries. Now, there's a lot of detail on here. I'm not going to go through all of it. And this is just oil, not gas. But the main takeaway from just looking at this map is you can see where all the pipelines radiate from in Alberta. That would be Edmonton. But there is a refinery in Edmonton. Most of the oil, majority of it that's produced in Alberta, is collected with pipelines and sent to Edmonton. And from Edmonton, that oil goes in a couple of directions. Mostly south and southeast, the big red and orange line there being a main line that heads to Chicago. There's no direct pipeline from Alberta to Ontario and Quebec and the eastern provinces. All the refined oil that you use in Ontario and east in Canada comes mainly from the United States. Now there is a green line here. Let me just point to it here. This line here is actually two lines. That was the original Trans Mountain pipeline that goes from Edmonton to Vancouver, and it was twinned, the Trans Mountain expansion there. What Mark Carney and Danielle Smith are talking about is potentially having another pipeline that would start in Edmonton here and then head in a western direction and end somewhere in the northwest coast of BC, either Kitimat, somewhere here, or Prince Rupert, somewhere in this area right here where you see my arrow on the map. Now, why would Alberta want a pipeline that does that? Well, number one, to increase capacity so they could sell more oil. And number two, to diversify their markets. And see, I've already made the mistake here and fell into the same trap that the media does when you read these headlines. I said Alberta wants, but Alberta doesn't sell oil, and Canada doesn't sell oil, and the United States doesn't sell oil. Oil companies sell oil. Oil companies that pump oil, or in the case of the oil sands, mine oil, like Suncor and Canadian Natural Resources. Those are two companies. Companies sell their oil. They sell their product. They don't sell their oil to the United States. A company like Suncor, who mines heavy oil, bitumen, they sell that oil to refineries down here in Texas. How do they get that oil to those refineries? Well, they put it in this pipeline system here, and it can follow various paths and end up in Texas. It's a very complicated system, this whole North American system, and things like this happen. Companies can find oil and pump oil in the United States and send that oil to the Gulf Coast here, where it is exported to other countries, unrefined, and at the same time, they can be buying, those companies can be buying oil, heavy oil, from companies like Suncor in Canada, transported through these pipelines to refineries down here in Texas, refine it within the United States, and use it domestically. United States companies import and export oil. The same with Canada. Some of the heavy oil that's produced from Fort McMurray gets piped to Edmonton. It's refined and used locally in the western provinces. Some of it goes down south. Some of it is transported to Vancouver here, where it's loaded on tankers, and a lot of the additional production that we've gained from the Trans Mountain expansion goes to China. So it's a very complicated system, and I hope that map wasn't too difficult to follow when I was trying to point at the things I was talking about. And a lot of times in the media, or even some politicians, especially Pierre Poilievre, like to simplify things by just spewing rhetoric that I know they know is incorrect, just to, I guess, get people hyped up. Like I've heard Pierre Poilievre say things like, it's about time we stop selling oil to the United States at a discount. We sell our oil down there at a discount. And if we just built a pipeline, then we could get world price for it and Canada would be rich. And that is so wrong on so many levels. The reason most of the oil from Canada, from the oil sands, gets a lower price than, say, West Texas Intermediate is because it's lower quality oil. Or if you don't like the terminology, lower quality, it requires more refining than some other oil. And the refineries in Texas won't pay as much for it because they have to spend money to refine it. So they will offer less to a Canadian company like Suncor to buy lower quality oil that needs to be refined more because they have to spend the money to refine it and then sell it and make a profit. West Texas Intermediate, another grade of oil, doesn't need as much refining, so it fetches a higher price. They could export that to other markets around the world, and they would get a higher price than Canada would be trying to export our heavier oil around the world. Incidentally, there's other oils that fetch a higher price than West Texas Intermediate, like North Sea Brent oil from the UK, or Saudi Arabia OPEC blend, which are all higher quality oils, and they fetch a higher price in the world market. So this idea that if Canada just builds another pipeline, then we'll be able to sell our oil to someone else and get more money, that's completely false. In fact, it's a very delicate system because that map that I just showed you and all the transportation and production and refining is all somewhat in balance right now. Right now as we speak, the market is in somewhat of a balance. And I would guarantee you one thing as an economist, if we could magically do this experiment, if we could just snap our fingers and all of a sudden, without anything else changing, there would magically be another 1 million barrels a day of Canadian heavy crude on the world market, the price would immediately drop. Why? It's just supply and demand. If supply just magically popped up 1 million barrels a day without demand changing, the price would go down. It's always a balancing act trying to add more infrastructure to be able to export more, a balance between the exporters trying to increase production and the people that are going to buy the product to increase their refining, world demand. There's so many factors that are in play, and the balance that even a slight threat to that balance, like a war or just some instability in the world. You've seen oil prices fluctuate in the world, $10, $20, $30 a barrel like that. So I've given you a little bit of a flavor of what the situation is in Canada, where the pipelines go. That map that I showed you was provided by Enbridge, which is one of the largest infrastructure pipeline companies that operates in North America. So wouldn't it be nice if an expert from Enbridge could give us their opinion? Well, it just so happens that one of them has recently. And that's captured here in this article posted on CBC November 15th. How 4 different expansions are planned for Canada's largest oil export pipeline system. And the head executive in charge of pipelines at Enbridge, the biggest company that operates pipeline systems, said, "We think that should do it." A handful of proposed expansions to major pipelines in the country could noticeably increase the amount of oil that can be exported out of Western Canada. In total, they add up to the equivalent of constructing a large brand new pipeline. Enbridge is proposing 4 different expansions to its pipeline system, which is the largest in the country. The Calgary-based company announced a final investment decision on Friday, that was a couple of weeks ago, to proceed with the first phase that will cost 1.4 billion US to add 150,000 barrels a day of capacity on its mainline system and an additional 100,000 barrels per day to its Flanagan South pipeline. The projects should be completed by 2027. Meanwhile, Trans Mountain, another company, is proposing 2 different improvements to its pipeline from Edmonton to a Vancouver area port. The pipeline's physical size won't change, but the Crown Corporation is exploring using drag-reducing agents to increase the amount of oil that can be transported. A second project would look at building stronger pumping stations to push more oil through the existing pipe. All combined, there shouldn't be any concerns of export limitations, even as oil companies keep producing more oil in Alberta. So while the federal government is talking to the Alberta government about the rules and regulations that govern the approvals for any future projects, whether they happen or not, that's happening. And there are some politicians like the Premier of British Columbia that's not very happy about it. There's other politicians like the Premier of Saskatchewan who's all in favor for it. There's federal politicians like Pierre Poilievre that are saying that the federal government just has to get out of the way. And if we build our own pipeline, then we won't get ripped off by the United States anymore, and Canada will be great again. There's a whole bunch of this inflammatory rhetoric. But the bottom line is that the experts, this executive in charge of liquid pipelines from Enbridge, the biggest company that builds pipelines, that owns most of the infrastructure in Canada, is basically saying that there are ways to increase capacity with the existing pipelines we have. Now, Enbridge is a company that builds pipelines. Enbridge would be a contender to build this new pipeline that Daniel Smith wants, the Northern Gateway pipeline it's been called in the past. Enbridge is a company that may want to do that, but they've clearly indicated that there's a lot of low-hanging fruit, much cheaper options to increase capacity. If major companies like Enbridge and Trans Mountain have a choice of just spending incremental dollars to increase pumping or adding chemicals to the oil to make it flow faster through existing pipelines, if they can spend on the order of a couple of $1 billion to increase capacity by 1 million barrels a day, they will certainly do that before ever agreeing to spend, say, 20 or $30 billion to build a brand new pipeline. It's just, we have to step back and understand that politicians will talk and they will posture and they'll blame each other when things aren't going their way, and there'll be a lot of amplified rhetoric. But at the end of the day, it's a business decision. It's companies that will have to decide in whatever regulatory framework is in place. And the federal government and the provincial governments will work on what that regulatory framework will be. Right now, Alberta has a regulatory framework within their province. The federal government handles the regulatory framework when it's a cross-province pipeline. As we speak right now, there's a blanket tanker ban. There's no tankers allowed in the northwest coast of British Columbia. We have different stakeholders that have different opinions on whether they agree with those regulations or not, and different politicians that either agree or not. Those things are being discussed right now. But at the end of the day, whatever the framework, the rules will be, it'll be a company based on those rules will have to make the decision. And as we stand right now, I still think that it's very unlikely that any company will commit to a major project like Northern Gateway Pipeline. You've heard it. I've just read the comments from the top executive of Enbridge. They've already approved the projects that they call pipeline expansions, which means expanding capacity in the existing pipelines they already operate. They're going to do that first. So don't hold your breath on a new pipeline getting approved next week and beginning construction this coming summer. It's just not going to happen. And there will be politicians that will try and capitalize on that. You'll have Pierre Poilievre saying, see, the Liberals can't build a pipeline. You need to elect me and I'll build a pipeline. And he's full of shit, because a Conservative government, if it was elected, would not build a pipeline. It would still be these private companies that would have to build the pipeline. The only government that's built a pipeline in Canada is the Canadian government, the last Liberal government under Justin Trudeau, that built the Trans Mountain Expansion project. Now, of course, the Conservatives say, well, that was a waste of time. They spent too much money, and the only reason it didn't get built was because they were in the way. And you can't win the argument, right? It's like arguing with a child. But the bottom line is the Canadian government owns that pipeline. It's a Crown corporation now, Trans Mountain. And the Canadian government has that as an asset on its books. And that pipeline makes a lot of money now. It's a net positive cash flow for Canada. Just to throw some numbers out there, if Trans Mountain is charging $2 a barrel transportation fee to use their pipeline, just throwing that number out there. I tried to find the actual number, I can't find it, but that's a typical range, $1 to $4 a barrel transportation fee. If they're charging $2 a barrel transportation fee, and that pipeline transports about 1 million barrels a day, that's $2 million a day. That's getting close to $1 billion a year in revenue for the Canadian government. So that pipeline is making money. And most of the oil that's transported through that pipeline is being sold to companies in China. And they're not paying much more than the companies in the United States, the refineries that are buying it through pipelines that are carrying it down to Texas. The prices might vary a little bit due to market factors and supply and demand, but we're not getting, as some politicians just spout nonsense, we're getting world price for that oil and we're getting ripped off by the Americans. That's just nonsense. From my perspective, I think it's much more likely that we will have numerous new natural gas pipelines built from Northeast BC to the West Coast, going to new LNG terminals which will be built. And those gas pipelines will carry natural gas produced in Alberta and BC, because that infrastructure is tied together. And any new LNG pipelines or LNG projects that would be situated on the West Coast would be a benefit to British Columbia and Alberta. So Alberta is getting pipelines. Right now they're getting gas pipelines, and companies that produce gas from Alberta or British Columbia are going to benefit from this new infrastructure. So I wanted to do this video just to give you some information on what's going on, present it to you like this, because I know from reading the articles in the media and listening to the various politicians that they all have their different angles, framing the whole issue very simplistically to just try and sway your opinion, depending on their point of view. So I hope you enjoyed some of the information. Leave some comments in the comments section. One of the things I'd like to ask you again, because it is really a legitimate concern, about the tanker ban in the northwest coast of BC. Are you for maintaining that tanker ban no matter what? Or are you for eliminating the tanker ban no matter what? Or are you somewhere in the middle that maybe we should allow tankers just for this specific project, certain types of tankers with certain safety standards? Let me know what you think in the comment section about that subject. Thanks for watching the video. Subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying my content. If you want to support me on a monthly basis, consider becoming a channel member by clicking the join button below. Have a fantastic rest of your day, everyone, and I'll catch you all on the next one.